legal penalties, that can be fines or other things, and we issue mandatory guidance. So we almost translate the legislation, so the law, we write guidance that companies can follow, and we say, hey, companies, if you're following this guidance, you're following the law and you're doing good. If you're not following the guidance, then penalties can be imposed, and we can go into what those kind of penalties look like later on. So in summary, Ofcom makes sure people can use communication services, including broadband. We make sure that the stuff you see on TV and the stuff you hear on the radio has a good kind of range and quality to it, and that if there is harmful or offensive material, that can be taken care of. So not many people, that's what many people know Ofcom for, is a place to complain when you see something on TV that you don't like. And that is indeed one of the things that we do. You can ask me about the stats of the most complained TV shows if you want to. We cover online services, which we're going to talk about now, and then the radio spectrum, which is an interesting area because it goes even down to things like remote car controls that use the radio spectrum. So all sorts of fun things in spectrum. Right, let's talk about online safety, because this is really where the kind of cybersecurity community, I think, has a lot of value to add, but also hopefully I'm going to add some value to your days as well. So Ofcom's online safety work really stems from this, the Online Safety Act of 2003, 2023 even. So it's a piece of primary legislation, so basically a brand new law. It became law about a year and a half ago, and it gives us, Ofcom, functions and duties as the regulator for online safety in the UK. And it puts duties on services that are regulated. I'll go into who they are in a second as well. The last bullet point on there, actually, as of kind of this month, is actually out of date. We do now have full powers. So they kind of came in sort of tranches about what enforcement powers we have. We now have all of them. So the Online Safety Act is live, as it were. And what does the Act tell you to do? Don't worry too much about all the arrows and the details. The kind of top bit on this slide is the important bit. The Act places the onus on regulated services, so that's online platforms, online services, to put in or have and maintain trust and safety processes on their platforms, effectively. So Ofcom's job isn't to police individual pieces of content. So if you see something online that you don't like, you don't complain to us about it. Our job, as you would with TV, our job is to make sure that the companies have systems and processes to deal with harmful content or for protecting users, particularly vulnerable or children users. And the arrows on the sort of on the slide just outline really the process that companies have to go through depending on various things. But we don't need to go into full detail on that right now. So who's in and who's out of scope? Really, there's kind of three types of companies or organizations that are in scope. It's services and platforms that provide user-to-user experiences, so where a user can post content that another user can see. Search services, so that's search engines effectively, and then services to publish pornographic material. There are exemptions for companies that can be out of scope, so like email services, SMS, below-the-line comment sections, so like on a news website, for example, internal business services, so if you have an intranet with a search function, that doesn't fall in scope, and then education and public bodies as well. So there's a few exceptions. Not everyone is in scope, but a lot of companies are, if you provide any of those services. So to kind of summarize what we're trying to achieve with our online safety activities, it's all about building a safer life online for people in the UK. It's about establishing standards via what we call codes of practice. So this is kind of the guidance that we're providing to companies to say, follow the guidance, you're following the law. We're driving industry improvements. So we have a whole team that does what we call supervision, which is basically having one-to-one relationships with some of the biggest and most impactful companies in this space, and then engagement with them to have dialogue. Assuring compliance through our enforcement action, so that's when we kind of go in and actually do the policing work, as it were, and issue fines, etc. And then holding services to account by by shining a light on both good practices, but also where there are shortcomings, and ensuring there's transparency and lots of reporting information on this. I didn't click that, but I'm about to go there anyway. Am I? There we are. Right, so you're probably thinking, I have a company, I offer XYZ services or products or platforms. Does the Online Safety Act apply to me? Well, the good news is we have created a tool on the Ofcom webpage. It's 6 questions. It should take 10 minutes or less to answer to check whether the Online Safety Act applies to you, either wholly or partially, and which parts do apply to you. Spoiler alert, those are the 6 questions, so you can go and sit and read it as we speak. But if you answer kind of yes to any of these questions, then chances are that parts of the Online Safety Act do apply to you, and there are things that you should be doing to make sure that you are complying with the requirements of the Act. If, depending on the kind of services you provide, you think that there are risks of illegal content being on your service or platform, we also have another tool for checking how to comply with those specific rules around illegal content. That applies to user and search services particularly. So do check out those tools for sure. I should also say I will provide the organizers with a version of the slides that has links to everything I'm telling you about, so that you can easily find it that way, but your search engine of preference will also surface these things. So this is some tools we have. I neglected to put on the slide as well a really important resource, because we're talking about AI and it's important. There's a forum called the Digital Regulators Corporation Forum, which is Ofcom, the Information Commissioner's Office, the Competition and Markets Authority, and the Financial Conduct Authority. Anyway, they're all regulators with slightly different remits, but they all cover the digital space, and we have this forum where we cooperate and coordinate various things. They have an AI hub, which is basically almost a helpline. So that if you're a company and you are developing, or you have an AI product or an AI service, and you're wondering, how does legislation apply to me? You can get in contact with the hub, and they will give you some answers effectively. So I'll make sure I amend the slides and include. Or maybe not. I'm back. Amend the slides and include the link to DRCF as well. In addition to those tools, we have a long range of guides. Some of them are quick and some of them are longer, but guides to just how to comply with the Online Safety Act, quick guide to highly effective age assurance, which is a really interesting area, child access requirement, illegal content, codes of practice, and illegal content risk assessment. So we recognize effectively that the legislation can be quite dense and hard to pass, and the codes of practice that we put out even are quite long and detailed, and so we have additional guides to help you navigate all of that material and ensure that you can comply with the regulation as and when you have to. So, turning to kind of the theme of the day about cyber safety in society, because I think there's good links between kind of the cybersecurity community and topic, and then the online safety aspect. I don't know exactly what the Venn diagram looks like, and we can debate what it looks like, but the links are really close. So our goal really is to make a real difference to real people. That's what the Online Safety Act is about, and I think the cybersecurity community has a really important role to play in that. So there's kind of 3 things that I put on the slide here. The first one is almost my personal view, but I do champion it internally as much as possible, is that like an insecure system is also an unsafe system. If you are not protecting your users' data effectively, then you can't ensure the safety of that data. If a malicious actor is able to breach your systems and, let's say, tinker with your recommender engine, then how can you ensure the safety of the people using that recommender engine? So security is absolutely kind of tantamount to safety, I think. The cybersecurity community produces a lot of products and services which can be safety-minded or help enhance safety on these platforms. And I think that's where what you do, writ large, can really be of good value to the kind of online safety agenda. And then finally, and this is a point I'm going to come back to many times today, is contributing to the discussion. You're all very knowledgeable, experts in your field, and you have a lot of information to share. Don't sit on that. Share it with us, and share it with each other, and share it with the wider community, for sure. I did mention that the Online Safety Act is new, and we've only kind of just got our powers, but we're already doing stuff. So there has been online safety in action. So you'll see all this in the news. We find TikTok a rather large amount of money, and OnlyFans a rather large amount of money as well for effectively procedural failures in relation to their online safety duties. And we've recently opened an investigation into a suicide forum as well to see if there have been breaches of the Online Safety Act by that particular forum. And this is something I'm always keen to promote to especially communities like this, is everything Ofcom does, almost everything we do, is accompanied by public consultations, because we want to hear from you about, are we doing the right thing? Is what we're proposing going in the right direction? Are there details we're getting right or wrong? And so we have very regular cadence of open consultations. We have one open at the moment on draft guidance for a safer life online for women and girls. Highly encourage you to have a look at it and contribute your views. You will see on the response form that there might be like 10 or 15 questions. You don't have to answer all of them. You don't even have to answer any of them. You can scroll down right to the bottom to the box that says any other comments and just fill that in. We will read it. And all evidence is valuable. We want a really big range of views from as many people as possible. So always encourage you to that. Those are the 9 things we're proposing, by the way. From a cybersecurity perspective, you might think number 4 is about kind of evaluation and product testing is a particularly interesting one, given I'm sure there's people in this room with kind of red teaming, pen testing expertise. Am I okay for time? Hopefully I'm all right. Yeah. So I was going to put up a Slido question, if it's gone on Slido. Don't worry if it hasn't. I'm very conscious that you're going to have opportunities to ask me questions, so I thought I'd preempt that by chucking questions at you, and then hopefully you'll ask me fewer questions. But some things to think about. Security and safety, are they the same thing, or are they different things? In certain domains, maritime, for example, they may or may not be the same thing. What's the most critical thing Ofcom should do you think? And what can we do to involve you? I've already told you about our open consultations, for example, but is there other things we can do? And then finally, this is probably the most critical one, how do you want to contribute to online safety? And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Well, actually, it's really nice to be in a really positive relationship with Ofcom, because in a previous job in a telecom provider, I was sitting on the wrong side of the table. So nice to reverse that. The questions that Andreas asked, is it possible to release those to a poll for people in the audience? Question at the back of the room? Yes. Okay, cool. So I think it may not be there yet, but it will be shortly. If you go to the tab on Slido, which has Q&A and then polls, it should be in polls, and you'll be able to respond to those questions, I think, which will be interesting, and hopefully we can get that up for the panel. A couple of points from me, really. I think that was a really clear connection between insecurity equaling unsafe. And we're going to explore that theme around security and safety a little bit more as the day goes on. And I think the other one, which I just want to flag, is the opportunity for consultation that's just been offered. This is a regular part of government policy making. Chris mentioned it around the Cyber Code of Governance from last year. So this is the opportunity for us as a community to make sure that we provided our expert input as well as our views as citizens. So we should make sure we take the opportunity to do that. It is part of our democracy, and it may well be. We're going to talk a little bit about democracy later in the day as well. So for our next topic, we're actually going to look at one very specific part of a capability that has been affected by the Online Safety Act, namely end-to-end encryption. And Jeff Revel is going to take off his cluster hat for a bit and resume his day job as Managing Director and co-founder of Safe Space One, a mental health platform. With over 35 years of experience in the digital sector, Jeff has a very strong background in health, defence, cybersecurity and privacy rights, and has held roles both in UK and in Silicon Valley. His expertise in AI and natural language understanding has been pivotal in developing the solutions for mental health, and he has an absolutely deep-seated commitment to leveraging technology for social good. So Jeff, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the mic working okay? Everyone can hear? I think it's picking it up.
Can you hear? Yeah?
Got a thumbs up?
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yep, great. So, like following on from Andreas, just to say, I've read the Online Safety Act. Andreas knows that because I commented on it and did provide some of that feedback. So nothing I'm going to say today, apart from some of the detail around it, is going to be a surprise to Ofcom. And they well understand the position that I will be taking. Oh, I need to click up. What is it, that one? Which one is it?
Right one.
Yeah. Is it that way? What do I need to push it at? Oh, there it is. Yep. So yeah, as Rupert kindly introduced me, one of the things I'm known for is I've won 2 innovation awards from the government to innovate in cybersecurity and online safety. And one of those, just before the Online Safety Act came in, was to fund my company to innovate in the context of using end-to-end encryption. So slightly miffed when the regulation changes and says, by default, that's no longer going to be an option. So I'm going to talk, so I've got a very vested interest, I'll put that out there right now, very biased perspective, but I just want to take a really big step back in time and just point out that this type of technology goes back 3,000 years. It's the oldest form of security that exists, and it started in Egyptian times. So they started by having unique hieroglyphs that they only shared with the mates that they wanted to communicate with, send a message, hieroglyph was gone, only that person could read it because he understood what the hieroglyph meant, right? That's how the kind of cybersecurity actually started. The internet was a little bit different. It started with ARPANET and the things that they were doing. Interestingly, when they first started, the platform of ARPANET, which became a packet switching system, which then became the internet, started without considering security. So arguably, the internet is based on technology that is not secure by design, and that's a really interesting thought, because this was used in defense. So you go, well, hang on a minute. Surely they were worried about security, right, in the defense sector, and of course they were. But they were using end-to-end encryption with the manual code books. They'd distribute those to the people that need it. They'd send the information encrypted over an open network. They didn't care who saw it, broke it up into 1,000 pieces. It came to the other end, got reassembled. The guy with the code book was able to discern what it was. A few years later, they then started to build the next layers of security in, and that became something called IPsec, which we all probably are very familiar with. So what's really interesting is that we are now using a technology for vast amounts of communication that wasn't built secure by design. And I think that's a really interesting thing, except if we use end-to-end encryption. It's the only technology that was designed for use over the internet. And I think that's a really important starting point. So, moving on from that, let's talk about the Online Safety Act. It doesn't ban end-to-end encryption, just to make that point. Go and have a look for the words end-to-end encryption in the Act. It doesn't exist in there. I couldn't find it. You won't find it. However, it does effectively ban what I'm putting forward as the societal benefits of end-to-end encryption. Those assurances that the communication between one or more individuals are truly confidential to those individuals and nobody else. And there is a role and a need for that kind of capability in society, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So what the actual Online Security Act effectively does is kind of undermine end-to-end encryption to the point where it's no longer end-to-end encryption, because it requires a service provider, like me, to actually have the capacity to go and peek into the communication content so I can moderate it. Well, as we will see, there are use cases where that really isn't appropriate. Now, interestingly, public services are exempt from the Online Safety Act. So if the government wants to use it, they can. Well, hang on a minute. What about if you're a private sector supplier supplying the government? Where do you sit? Right? It's interesting questions start to come around. What if you're taking that same technology and sending it to an entirely private company, but the NHS is using it? Get into some rather interesting questions. So, and of course you can use it in educational childcare. They're also exempt from aspects of the Online Safety Act, and yet the media discussion is really largely around protecting our children. The other point I want to bring out is it kind of brings out an innovator's dilemma. As an innovator, I think I can speak to this, but put very simply, if I'm talking to customers and prospects, they might raise the question, hang on a minute, isn't your tech banned? Because, of course, that's the media perspective. That's their start point of discussion. Talk to investors, and they're going, well, how's Ofcom going to actually assess your technology for use? The answer is, don't know, Gov. Kind of a bit of a risk factor from the investor point of view, kind of dissuades them. So this kind of technology is going to find it difficult to get into the market. Now, just to be really clear, I want to make a couple of, this is something I've spent years working on, but just to keep things really simple, there is a difference between privacy and confidentiality, because a lot of what I want to talk today about is not privacy per se, but about confidentiality. And the reason for that is that end-to-end encryption is more about confidentiality assurance than privacy assurance. It also does privacy assurance. Privacy assurance is really about purpose limitation. The information I've given to you is only going to be used for this purpose and nothing else. That is effectively what you do in a digital system. You limit that purpose and use, and you have to be transparent with people about what that limitation actually is, and you have to give them the tools to check it up, right? That's what the GDPR requires. Confidentiality is really about access rights. And the interesting point about that is who needs access. Now, in end-to-end encryption, what you end up with is a system that says, I'm going to make sure the only people possibly able to see this communication are those that need access. That doesn't happen in any other system architecture because, unfortunately, a lot of you people in this room have God mode, and you can see everything that's going on. So in a client-server model, the encryption key management, which is the key sort of central function of everything, is that somebody in every organization ultimately has the key to everything, could administer everything, they can look at everything. And we'll talk in a minute about whether that's right or wrong. Whereas in end-to-end encryption, one of the things that we like to communicate to prospective users is, I guarantee you there's nobody inside my organization will ever see any of the content that you're communicating. And I would put forward in this discussion today that there are reasons why that is a priority for safety online in certain use cases. And that's what I want to get into today. So what it's really about is the trust model. Right? The trust model between people matched to the trust model that the digital system can implement. With end-to-end encryption, your trust model resides with the communicating entities and nowhere else. Every other system, the trust model resides with the organization, and the only way of protecting that is through legislation, through the contracts of agreement between the individual and the organization, and let's face it, how many people read them? If they do read them, how many understand them? And if they can understand them, do they have the capacity or financial capability to take on the organization if they disagree with them? And the answer to all those questions is generally no. So if we come back to the real world, we often have situations where mutual trust is assumed, right? Where we can expect confidentiality by default. So why should that change just because we're moving our communication mechanism to a digital medium? Why can't we continue to have that kind of capability in our society? So, my example, and this is my business, is the doctor-patient room. Now, when I go into a room with a doctor, I may never have met them before. This might be the first time I've met this particular doctor. Let's face it, in the GP today, how often do you get to see the same GP, right? And yet, when I walk in that door, I'm going to start by disclosing the very most personal concerns about myself to that individual. I start with a point of trust. And we trust because we believe they have their best interests our best interests in mind. We empower them to investigate our concerns because of that trust. Now, let's look at that from a doctor-patient, post-open system architecture. Open system. See that? OSA, right? Open system architecture. I've spent too long in defense. The Online Safety Act, right? In that environment, there is always an anonymous, unknown to the patient, unknown to the doctor, third party capable of listening into that communication. In fact, the OSA requires it. Right? So that raises the question. There's plenty of IT people in the room. Quick question. Who here, as an IT manager, CISO, security manager, information officer, Who here has been ethically trained? Yep, just the one.
And what is that, though? What is that ethically trained? Like, your ethics might be different from someone else's as well.
Correct. One of the challenges of ethics is indeed, I went to a big ethics conference in Cardiff once and trying to figure out what that meant, and I came away more confused than when I went in. The reality is you do have to contextualize the ethics to the use case, and there is plenty of examples of that. The Caldecott principles for health, for example, are well defined.
Can I just say something? We're talking about doctors. Teachers are also ethically trained and they abide by the rules, for example.
Yeah, well, I was going to go into that because that's actually a lot of other sectors where the model I'm using here this is not a unique to health. HR, corporate governance sometimes, management, the financial management, all of these areas where the same sort of concepts and principles, and we'll get to the concepts and principles, kind of exist, right? So what I want to talk about is when we should consider end-to-end encryption should have an exemption under the Open Systems, I will get it right, Online Safety Act. If one of the parties is ethically trained, is expected in society to be confidential, to treat our information confidential, and can be trusted, and this is the key point. The point of the Online Safety Act is that we have a lot of people in social media in particular who are untrusted talking to untrusted, paedophiles talking to children, bullies talking to people about self-harm and encouraging it. These things we want to stop. So I'm not against the Online Safety Act in principle. I'm against some of its implementation and legislation because, of course, the law kind of tries to be black and white, and we need to operate in shades of grey. So there are times also when that confidentiality is actually essential to the communication process, like the doctor-patient relationship, the teacher-parent, or the teacher-child, right? These are things that have to happen. And whereas we digitize society, we need to keep those functions going, right? And it's also true that the trust and the ability to trust that digital medium for communication can actually have direct impact on outcomes. It's been demonstrably shown in more research studies than I can count that a well-trusted doctor providing guidance to an individual will drive superior outcomes, irrespective of the guidance. They could tell them something's completely inappropriate. Doesn't matter. The trust is more important than the treatment, perversely, which is why the placebo effect works quite so well. So, in summary, I think we need to really, as a society, allow end-to-end encryption because it's needed. And we need clear guidance from Ofcom to help us understand when that can be done. And it will be sectorial, I suspect, because that ethics is contextual, that trust model is contextual. But we need to understand what it is going to take, and we need to be talking to the doctors' associations and those sorts of people about how we translate the trust that we want to put in them so that we can continue to allow them to use things like end-to-end encryption because it's so important to society itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I thought that was extremely thought-provoking, I have to say, and I think introducing trust as a key issue and the trust model. And I like the example particularly from that sort of doctor-patient relationship that actually are we missing the trick here a little bit of thinking about our real-life interactions and how we emulate those exactly in our digital environment, and I think we will return to that a little bit later. Okay, so for our third presentation of this session, I'd like to introduce Heather Lowry, CISO and founder of EarthGuard, a leading cybersecurity consultancy. Heather has extensive experience in cyber resilience and risk management. She's held senior roles in both public and private sectors, and also holds the accolade for being the first CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, at the University of Manchester, where she's led strategic transformations in information security. During this presentation, she's going to expand our horizons a little bit, considering the impact of digital harms on democracy and society, of course, and what should we do about it. So, Heather, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I believe that I'm standing in for Amnesty International today, so you have a technologist and a cybersecurity professional rather than Amnesty International. I'll try to do my very best in terms of this topic. It's not my normal subject matter for...
Oh, it's me. My apologies.
Excellent. I'm not sure, it's maybe...
Just change that one to that one. You happy to do that, or would you
Yeah, no,
you
I
can
know.
have this one if you'd rather.
The microphone's broken on it.
Is that okay? Can you all hear me better now? Oh, that's lovely. Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in the southwest of England. Despite my accent, I always feel very at home here, having an aunt from Bath, so I spent a lot of my childhood holidays in the southwest of England, so it's a pleasure to be here. Anywhere that's got Roman ruins feels like home to me, so lovely to be in Exeter. So the topic that I've been asked to speak about today is safeguarding democracy through cyber. And I have to say, I only have 15 minutes to cover this topic, and it's a real privilege to build on the really high quality contributions that we've heard earlier, because I think many of the themes that I'll touch on pick up in points that Andreas and Jeff have made, and also the points that Chris made at the start. So starting this, this conference with the Cyber Governance Code of Practice, I think was an excellent framing for us. And I really hope that we start to think about that as a technology governance code of practice going forward, because I think it's so important that we think about the role of governance in our organisations and our societies. So I'm broadening this conversation a little bit to think about democratic resilience from organisational resilience, moving up to how we think about societal resilience. So to introduce myself, the reason that I'm introducing myself in terms of the roles that I've held over my career is not so that you can see my CV, but so that you can see how someone who started as a software engineer, so I went onto a graduate training programme working in systems development. I never imagined that 25 years later I would be speaking about safeguarding democracy. But I think there's a lesson here in terms of how we have moved from systems development, technical development, through to technology, technological change now being so important as part of societal change. So when I started my career, I worked in an IT department in a financial institution, and I was doing systems development as an IT professional, joined the British Computer Society, very much as a technologist. And over that period of time, we can see how digital has become so embedded in everything that we do in our organisations and in our society, that really when we're talking about technology change now, we're thinking about societal change. And one of the challenges that we have is that the pace of change with technology is accelerating, and our society, our institutions need to keep up with that. And I think it's so encouraging to see the presentation that we had earlier about the Online Safety Act and the invitation to respond to consultations, the way that we saw Jeff engaging with feedback on the regulatory process as well. I think it just shows how we, it's a model for how we want to work going forward. I'm not sure.
No, it's fine. You were very loud. They just turned it down.
Excellent. So I speak to you as a cybersecurity professional and as a technologist, but this is really about how technology has now become so fundamentally important to our society that when we're thinking about technological change, we're thinking about societal change. So the situation that we're currently in, we see democracy under pressure, and this is not only in the UK, this is in democratic societies throughout the world, and we're all very familiar with the challenges that we face in terms of democratic resilience. Some of these challenges, we have AI-enabled disinformation at scale, which is a massive challenge for democratic societies to deal with. Declining trust in institutions, erosion of rights and civil liberties, and it was encouraging to hear the presentation earlier about data harms and the right to privacy, and really informing individuals and citizens about their rights in that regard. the weaponization of technology. So I think when we think about cybersecurity as a field, we see the ways in which technology can be used for harm and also for good. And what I want to do here is not think about, not dwell on the decline that we see, but think about the opportunities for renewal and for agency and for that narrative of possibility. So how might we think about the possibilities for action faced with these very significant challenges that we have in democratic societies? And the point that I want to make here is that democracy is a system. It's a system like any other system, and it can be designed, and it's our responsibility to design it well as citizens. But it's also more than that. It's a shared agreement about how we live together. And I think what we've seen in this conference today is almost a perfect model of how democracy should work, if I can say that. We had DCIT, we've had Ofcom, we've had citizen engagement. And we are having this discussion in a forum, a place for debate and for discussion. And I think this is a model that we need to think about in terms of broader society as well. So we have very significant challenges. These are not abstract challenges. These are challenges that we face here and now, but we have a choice in how we respond to them. And what I suggest is that we think about, so this is a quote from the American philosopher John Dewey, democracy has to be born anew every generation, and education is its midwife. So a very famous book on democracy and education, and Dewey really saw education as fundamental to democracy. So when I'm thinking about pathways to renewal here, and I'll suggest 3 pathways, education is at the forefront of that. So understanding our rights as citizens, understanding the values of the society that we live in, what those values are, agreeing on them, and building them into the technologies and the systems that we design, I think is fundamental. So to frame the possibility that we have, and I only have 10 minutes or so left, so this is very much high-level suggestions, but what if technology could actually strengthen democracy? What if citizens, institutions, and innovation could align? And what if digital spaces amplified trust and participation? So what we've seen in this forum this morning with trust and participation, what if we could also see that in our digital spaces and in our platforms? What if we could take the engagement that we've had in this room and put that into the digital world as well? And that's what I encourage us to think about as a narrative of possibility. So it's not just thinking about protecting democracy, so this is a call to possibility, not just protection. We can design democracy as well as defend it. And we have to do that anew every generation, as Dewey reminds us. We need to think intentionally and purposefully about the systems that we're designing, and democracy is one of them. So what are the pathways that we can think about to democratic resilience? I would suggest that the first one is empowered citizens. So as we've seen in this forum this morning, empowered citizens lead to a strong democracy. So the discussions and the engagement that we've been having today, that is democracy in action. We need to invest in digital and civic education to build resilience to manipulation, disinformation, and polarization, which is ever increasing in our society. Equipping citizens with tools to critically engage with information ecosystems, with regulators even, as we've seen this morning. Supporting trusted media, open data, and knowledge-sharing networks, as we see in the cybersecurity cluster that we're part of. So digital literacy is really the new civic skill, and we have to invest in that for a strong democratic future. That's one pathway. The other one we've already heard much about this morning, so technology that serves democracy. Transparent and explainable AI, not just security, not just safety, but thinking about responsible AI as a democratic imperative, the values that we want to design into AI systems. transparent, explainable, inclusive and accountable design processes, and enhanced civic participation, just as we've been doing here this morning, and the protection of our digital rights. So understanding and increasing engagement. We had an excellent presentation earlier about our information rights, our data rights. So understanding and broadening that out and thinking about how we can design intentionally technology that serves democracy. And the third pathway to renewal, I only have 5 minutes left, so only got 3. Resilient institutions build trust. Trusted digital infrastructure. So it's not just about security, it's about trustworthy systems, trustworthy digital infrastructure. Transparency, accountability, and responsiveness from our institutions, as we've seen this morning in terms of the engagement that we've had with government and with regulators. And cross-sector collaboration for resilience. So taking the learnings, the knowledge and the perspectives that we have from all of the different sectors that we operate in. Resilience is really the foundation of trust. So we need to think about trust going forward, and that's fundamental to democratic resilience. So if I could move forward. Absolutely.
Can we advance the slide, please?
You broke the computer, didn't you?
Trustworthy systems. Excellent. What I want to suggest, we heard about governance earlier. I want to suggest that leadership is also critical to this journey that we're all on as a society. And it's really leadership for democratic futures. There's not just one future, there's multiple futures that we can build. In cybersecurity, as cybersecurity professionals, we have to adapt our leadership style depending on the context that we're operating in. So if you're dealing with a cyber attack, an incident, you have that command and control directive style. You change that to more of a coaching style when you're working with your team. You change that to more of a collaborative style when you're working with your stakeholders. We also need visionary leadership at the societal level. And we need to be thinking about the futures that we want to build and the democratic systems that we want to build going forward. So if we think about resilience as a societal imperative, anticipatory governance, so anticipating threats, thinking about the future, innovating responsibly, opening up innovation ecosystems so that everyone can participate, and fostering the conditions that we need for meaningful progress, all of that is about leadership. And it's about visionary leadership, the kind that we've seen today in this forum. And that's something that we need to think about as absolutely fundamental to the health of democracy going forward, because the health of our democracy will depend on its digital foundations, and we need to be designing our digital futures as if the future mattered. So as if it was here and now, not just thinking about the systems that we're designing that are right in front of us, but also being future focused and thinking about the systems that we're designing for the future and what the future of our society will look like. So designing democracy. As I said, democracy is a system, and like any system, it can be designed. We speak about secure by design. We need to make sure that we are also democratic by design. So thinking about the values that we are building into the systems that we are developing, and democracy is one of these systems. If we could move to the next slide, please. So the narrative of possibility that I want to present to you here is that we are not just defending democracy, we are designing it for resilience. So we can lead with imagination and vision rather than fear. And we have started to do that as cybersecurity professionals. We don't rely on fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We think about the systems that we're designing intentionally. We can also think about democracy in that regard. We need to accelerate the progress that we are making towards safe, free, fair and democratic futures, because the pace of technological change is such that we need to keep up with it. Democratic innovations that improve the quality of democratic representation, governance and inclusion need to be a priority. So when we think about innovation, we need to be about fostering the conditions for meaningful progress and democratic innovations that can help us to do that. We have tools that are available. We need to make sure that we're using them intentionally. Designing democracy through innovations that strengthen representation and governance will mean that we are not just defending democracy, but we are designing it for resilience. So we're not just responding to the threats, the very serious threats that we face. We're making sure that we can also withstand, we can adapt, we can continue going forward and continue with the values that we hold important to us as a society. So the final thought that I'd like to leave you with, conscious that I only have 15 minutes to cover this topic, is that secure by design is democratic by design. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for fighting through. I'm sorry, all of those gremlins you just had to deal with. Don't run away. Please do take a seat.
Thank you.
Just put on the mic. And if our other panelists could rejoin us. I think when those of us who got involved in cybersecurity, we probably didn't see the opportunity to be, I think bring the other mic, the opportunity to be sort of superhuman and defending democracy. But clearly that's the position we found ourselves in. So lots of opportunity. Right. We've got some good questions, and there's some that are a bit more deeper and a little more philosophical. Should I pass that one along, actually? Just in case anyone wants it. Thank you. There's some that are a little bit more philosophical, but I think I'll start with some quick wins because we didn't get many of the panel questions through last time. So I think I'm going to start with the Online Safety Act, Andreas, and there are a couple of particular questions around thinking around that and end-to-end encryption. And I know that there's obviously a real active challenge on at the moment going through the courts that we won't get necessarily into, and I wouldn't put you on the spot to talk about it because you won't be able to. So I think more generally, though, that I don't know if you can't see it, so I'll read it out. That there was one around hobbyist sites and content that isn't necessarily pornography related. And don't promote illegal content, but are also in scope of the Act. And there's a view around it stifling expression of thought. So I think that introduces this topic of like balance and how can you be really defined on what the OSA is focusing on, and how can you allow freedom of thought elsewhere. I don't know if you want to start with that around the sorts of processes you go through to try and get that right.
It is a really good question. There's, I think, two facets to kind of the answer. I don't know how satisfactory the answer is going to be, but unfortunately that's what you get from public sector sometimes. One is proportionality, and the other is about freedom of expression directly. Everything that Ofcom does in regards to the Online Safety Act does have freedom of expression built in as a consideration. So when we are designing our codes of practice and the measures that companies have to take in regards to following the Online Safety Act, freedom of expression is always a consideration. So that's basically what I'm saying is we're not ignoring freedom of expression as a concern, and it's absolutely something that the Online Safety Act strives to maintain as a kind of foundational feature of life in the UK, democratic UK at that. On the proportionality bit, I do get this question a lot about why have sort of hobbyists or smaller websites been caught up in the Act. I suppose the spirit of the Act isn't necessarily designed to catch those kinds of websites or services. The proportionality element comes into it about which services or platforms have large amounts of users and could potentially cause large amounts of harm. Those are the ones who, from an enforcement and kind of enforcing legislation perspective, we can have the most impact. That's not me saying that if you're operating a hobbyist website, that you can't be enforced against. But what I'm saying is proportionality as a consideration means that that's not necessarily where the focus is from an enforcement perspective.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not going to draw a direct comparison, but if we wanted to look at the Data Protection Act and the ICO, a similar regulatory activity, you might choose to look at the sorts of cases where they've taken them forward and where they've used different levels of censure to deal with the outcomes. Obviously, time will tell on how that runs into OSA. I mean, Jeff, you talked around the requirement for end-to-end encryption to have exemptions. Where does that sit with the sort of proportionality argument, and how do you think you can, in the industry particularly that you're working in, you can evidence that proportionality?
I think, first of all, I wouldn't want to be in Andreas's seat. Because anybody who followed the development of the Online Safety Act will know it's largely a bit of a fudge in a lot of areas. And Ofcom's job is to untangle the fudge and put some clarity in for us who actually want to do stuff in the real world. And that's a really tough position. I guess on proportionality and everything else, my concern with the Online Safety Act in general is that it actually is a law that could facilitate overreach by government, because the laws could enable shall we say, a more extreme government to be more extreme in their guidance on how they want to see the law interpreted. That's what puts Ofcom in such an invidious and difficult position, because they're sat between us, the citizens, and the government. And that's always a difficult one when your paymaster is the government. So I think that's my largest concern in general. I don't think it's a today problem, because resource and focus is very much on the big players who clearly are causing harm. What I'm worried about is time. Time is the one where these things change and vary, and that's what I'll be watching for. Okay, great, thank you. I'm just going to get a little bit more general and maybe a little bit more philosophical as well, because that is at the essence of what we've been hearing this last panel. That balance of fundamental individual rights and the needs of society, and people have been debating that for thousands of years. And I think, therefore, my question will be around these challenges that we're talking here, around how do we get this right? We don't know whether it's right yet in terms of the specifics for the OSA, but do you think we'll ever get it right, or do you think we will improve over the next few years, or do you think we'll still be here in 5 years' time having the same conversation? I'm going to start with you, Heather, if I may. Yeah,
I'd very much hope that we are still here in 5 years' time having this same conversation, okay, because it's about education, and it's an ongoing. It's part of being a citizen is being continually educated, continually participating, having this kind of dialogue. And I think as society changes, as technology changes, making sure that we're empowered, we're educating, we're having this kind of dialogue. I very much hope that we are still here in 5 years' time. I think to your point on the balance between individual rights and the broader societal good, I think there's something about educating everyone about democratic values, the protection of minorities, understanding that balance and what the futures could look like. And I think that's something that I'd like to see much more of. So not just speaking about, educating in cyber skills or digital literacy, but also education in terms of democratic values, what our rights are as citizens, what our responsibilities are to each other. So that, that civic education more broadly. And I think this is a great model for how that could work going forward.
So actually, I think that's a really good point, and I did want to talk around the education piece. So maybe we'll just broaden the question as I come to Jeff and then Andreas, which is actually, how well are we as individuals and citizens prepared to either deal with these issues individually, or when actually we can see that they are all converged, right? It's the same issue, similar issues, and then we're now looking at it from a cyber perspective.
Yeah. If I sort of go back to personal experience a bit, I was in and working and leading a large software team in Silicon Valley when Google and Facebook were born. So I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s. And at the time, I was chatting with some of these tech bros, And I didn't know then the problems that we are now seeing today, but it didn't feel good. I can tell you that. And it wasn't until literally over 10 years later when my eldest daughter got to 13 and said, "Daddy, can I have a Facebook account?" I went, "God, no." Right? Because I knew exactly what they were up to by then. But my point is, it took me, as somebody in the sector who understands the technology, who understands what's going on, took me 10 years to really wrap it around and have a personal context into which assess the risks, the level of involvement I should take, and the focus that I should give my ongoing life. And it was that point where I really started to look at regulation, GDPR, privacy rights, and started moving away from security by design into privacy by design, and in my latest organization, confidentiality by design. Because it took me that long. It's 20 years. Right? So we can't expect society to move that fast. And that's from somebody who kind of has a bit of an insight as to what's really going on. Yeah. The average person just wants to get on with their life. So finding ways to engage them is probably our biggest challenge, because education won't happen without engagement.
Okay. Andreas?
I was going to say a few things to sort of echo what Jeff just said in terms of industry moved fast and they broke some things. That was the model they were operating by, and as Heather said, kind of society is still catching up to what the technological reality is. I would say one thing that helps in terms of kind of moving the conversation forward and raising awareness is sort of mature media portrayals like Adolescence is a good one to single out. A lot of you will have seen it. It's sort of being rolled out for wider viewing because of the way that it quite accurately portrays a lot of the challenges that are kind of evident in this space, and to sort of Jeff's point about who knows what's going on and who has knowledge to challenge some of the things that are happening. Do you need technical expertise? Hopefully the answer is no. But either way, in terms of, as I said, moving the conversation forward and raising awareness, I think those kinds of media portrayals that aren't necessarily full of hysteria or sensationalist can be really, really valuable as an educational piece, almost, to your point.
I think it's really important that the point that you're making, Andreas, about industry moved fast and broke some things and we're catching up. And what we're also seeing now as well is deeply strategic threats where technology is being weaponized to exploit these divisions that exist within our society. And I think that's something that, we all need to be aware of, because to understand how to defend democracy, we need to understand both what democracy is and the threats that we face currently. So that, and those threats are accelerating and evolving. So I think there's it's a very challenging, but also, it's a moment of possibility, but it's also a very challenging point that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and I suppose I mean, for me, and it connects with what Rowena was talking about earlier on around the harms piece, it's that transparency of how our interactions with these systems, actually then drive the outcomes, because that's the piece of knowledge, I think, which I see. I mean, I have 3 children, that they're all digital users, and I have the same issues that you just seen in that TV series. And I concern that if I think people knew more of what was happening, they'd be more informed. So there's an education piece which I think is formal within society, which maybe needs to go further, and then there is clearly just that transparency piece, which actually comes from from the service provider, and maybe the OSA will see more of that over time. There are a few more questions on here which I'd just like to run through. We've got a few minutes. They're a bit more specific, but I think it's had enough upvotes that we should talk about it. It's one at the top, which is the concern around the sort of end-to-end encryption, regulatory backdoor type of piece being open to wider exploitation by law enforcement and security, etc. So if you're able to, are you able to say a little bit around the checks and balances on how those sorts of things might work? I don't know who wants to start. Andreas, I think maybe, and then Jeff, you can give the...
So, I mean, I think what I have to say, of course, is that that's not the intention of the Online Safety Act. The intention is about keeping people in the UK safe in their online experiences. I don't know if I can say more than that official line with my Ofcom hat on.
That's fine.
At lunchtime, we can have a separate discussion if you want.
Okay, so there we go. There'll be a long queue for you for lunch. Anybody else want to, Jeff, do you want to add to that at all, or not really?
Well, I think I pretty much said it in the talk, but I also want to go back to sort of the context for the question, which is about the harms link. And one of the things I realized a long time ago is that the way in which the digital technology advances is that you have a temporal problem, and the average citizen has no capability, and Rowena said this, has no capability to connect their action at some point in the past, many years back, but to the consequence that they're having now. And the consequence of that is that society is normalized around the problem, and that becomes the way in which society operates, which goes back to your point when you were making it about anticipatory governance, right? We've got to see that stuff coming. We've had enough lessons. We've had over 20 years of lessons about how the internet, 30 years nearly, of how the internet's evolved and the problem it creates. If we can't be anticipatory now, when will we be? Because if we're not anticipatory, then the connection between action and consequence will continue to be lost, and society won't be able to, as citizens, get to grips with the digital sphere and understand how they, as individuals, have an ability to influence it. Because it's gone. It's like, it's too late now. Yeah. Oh yeah, they've got some laws coming in, and they're having to do all this stuff to stop the harms, which we've all seen for 15 years. Right? It's taken that long to sort of get our heads around. If that was anticipatory governance, it would have been in place and operating for 10 years now. So we don't have that, and we don't have a model for that at this point in time. And I think that's a concern for the digital society that's moving so fast.
Okay, great. I'm aware that this is the last thing before us and lunch, and we're almost back on time. But I also don't want us to leave going, okay, there's a big problem here. How do we sort it out? And so I think this is a question with a bit of a call to action for the audience, really. So for each of you, I think what role, what a tangible thing from now can people in the audience do, whether they're an individual, an SME, or working within a larger environment and business, to help us progress this issue in terms of education, awareness, balance going forward. Who would like to kick off?
Yeah, I'll start on that one just because I'm first in the line. I think it's about finding ways to engage society first, to make them interested, because they got lives and they got other stuff to do. Yeah, we're all digital and we're all techie and we're in here because this is the stuff we care about and we want to, But to be honest, I challenged when I was organising this event, trying to find out how to reach beyond this community to the wider audience, to start that educational process. And I don't think we succeeded this year. I'll be honest, I'd say, put my hand up there. That's kind of, we didn't get there. How do we get there? That to me is the first problem, is to, and it's not about scare factor, because when we started the Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster, the first thing we started to do, and Pete will remember this, we used to go around to the local business communities and we would scare the hell out of them about what the consequences of cyber attacks were. And we quickly learned that, it kind of got their attention, but nothing changed. It's got to be the other way around, which is why we focus on ESG and things like that. We've got to find a way that says, you want to engage because it's good for you. We're all selfish beings. And finding that means, and I haven't got the magic answer, by the way. I'm searching for it, but finding that magic means to engage society in the digitization of society in a manner that says, I'm interested in this, and even though I know nothing about it. That, I think, is a central, to me, that's the key problem, that if we could wrestle that one down, things would start to fall into place.
Okay. Heather.
I would suggest that as individuals and as organisations, collectives, we can have conversations about values. So not about politics, but about the democratic values of the society that we live in and the values that are important to us when we're going forward. And we can foreground those conversations. So in our work as cybersecurity technology professionals, we can be thinking intentionally about the values that we want to design into the systems that we create, and the futures that we want to create. But we can also do that more broadly. We can speak to our children, we can speak to our friends, we can speak to our colleagues just about the values of the society that we live in, what's important to us, and the values that we want to protect going forward.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Andreas?
What I was going to say was actually an amalgamation of what was already said, with the addition that when you start having these discussions in this community or with friends and family, you will get asked for advice. You're experts. You will say, well, what should I do to protect myself online? Or how should I secure my account? Or whatever it is. Be realistic in the advice you're giving. Don't go around saying you should have 3-factor authentication and RSA to this number of bits. No one will understand what that is. So know who you're talking to and kind of target those low-hanging fruits, for sure. And then the other thing I wanted to add was about championing security and safety by design. As Jeff said in his talk, the internet wasn't designed with security in mind. And we all know that adding security as a layer on top is suboptimal. You all know that. Champion it as you go out and talk to people.
Great, thank you. And I just ask, the community here and online, if you've got a thought around things that we should do as a community, or you're going to do to take forward this issue, post it in the questions, because then we can share that with everybody and also include it in some of our future thinking around the engagement that the cluster does. With that, I'd like to thank Heather, Andreas and Jeff for their very thought-provoking presentations and for making the effort to share those insights with us. And I'm glad to say it is lunchtime. So lunch is served just outside where you had coffee and the like. Do again, please visit our sponsors if you haven't yet. Understand what their role in the equation we've been looking at this morning is. And then we will kick off again at 1400. Thanks so much.